All this long time, Chapter 17. The war would end. Uncle Henrik had said that, and it was true. The war ended almost 2 long years later. Amory was 12. Church bells rang all over Copenhagen early in that May evening. The Danish flag was raised everywhere. People stood on the streets and wept as they sang the national anthem of Denmark. Anne-Marie stood on the balcony of the apartment with her parents and her sister and watched. Up and down the street and across on the other side, she could see flags and banners in almost every window. She knew that many of those apartments were empty. For nearly 2 years now, the neighbors had tended to the plants, dusted the furniture, polished the candlesticks for the Jews who had fled. Her mother had done so for the Rosens. It's what friends do, Mamma had said. Now neighbors had entered each unoccupied waiting apartment, opened a window, and hung a symbol of freedom there. This evening, Mrs. Johansson's face was wet with tears. Christy, waving a small flag, sang. Her blue eyes were bright. Even Christy was growing up. No longer was she the light-hearted chatterbox of a child. Now she was taller, more serious, very thin. She looked like the pictures of Lisa at 7 in the old album. Peter Nielsen was dead. It was a painful fact to recall then this day, when there was so much joy in Denmark, but Anne-Marie forced herself to think of her red-headed almost brother, and how devastating the day was when they received the news that Peter had been captured and executed by the Germans in the a square of Rivganingen in Copenhagen. He had written a letter to them from prison the night before he was shot. It simply said that he loved them, that he was not afraid, and that he was proud to have done what he could for the country. And for the sake of all free people, he had asked in the letter that he be buried next to Lisa. But even that was not for Peter. The Nazis refused to return the bodies of these young men that were shot in Rivadagain. They simply buried them there where they were killed. They marked the grave only with numbers. Later, Anne-Marie had gone to the place with her parents, and they laid flowers there on a bleak, unnumbered ground. That night, Anne-Marie's parents told her the truth about Lisa's death at the beginning of the war. She was in the part of the resistance too, said Papa. Explained. Part of the group fought for our country in whatever ways they could. We didn't know, Mama added. She didn't tell us. Peter told us after she died. Oh, Papa, Anne-Marie cried. Mama, they didn't shoot Lisa, did they? The way they did Peter in a public square with people watching? She wanted to know. She wanted to know it all, but it wasn't certain that she would be able to bear the knowledge. But Papa shook his head. She was with Peter and the others in a cellar, and they held secret meeting to make plans. Somehow the Nazis found out, and they raided the place that evening. They all ran in different ways to escape. Some of them were shot, Mama told her sadly. Peter was shot in the arm. Do you remember that Peter's arm was bandaged in a sling at Lisa's funeral? He wore a coat over it so no one would notice, and a hat to hide his red hair. The Nazis were looking for him. Anne-Marie didn't remember. She hadn't noticed. The whole day was been a blur of grief. What about Lisa? She asked. If she wasn't shot, what happened? From the military car, they saw her running, and they just simply ran her down. So it was true what you said, that she was hit by a car? It was true, Papa told her. They were all so young, Mama said, shaking her head. She blinked and closed her eyes for a moment and took a long, deep breath. So very, very young, with so much hope. Now, remembering Lisa, Anne-Marie looked from the balcony down into the street, and she saw that below, amid the music and singing, the sounds of church bells, people were dancing. It brought back another memory, the memory of Lisa so long ago wearing the yellow dress, dancing with Peter on that night that they announced their engagement. She turned and went to her bedroom where the blue trunk stood in the corner, as it had all these years. Opening it, Anne-Marie saw that yellow dress had begun to fade. It was discolored at the edges where it had laid so long in the folds. Carefully, she spread out the skirt of the dress and placed it where the Ellen's necklace lay inside the pocket. The little Star of David gleamed gold. Papa? she said, returning to the balcony where her father was standing with the others, watching, rejoicing crowd. She opened her hand and showed him the necklace. Can you fix this? I've kept it all this time, and it was Ellen's. Her father took it from her and examined the broken clasp. Yes, she said, I can fix it. When the Rosens come home, you can give it back to Ellen. Until then, Amory told him, I will wear it myself. The afterword. How much of Amory's story is true? I know I will be asked that. Let me try to tell you. Here's where fact ends and fiction begins. Amory Johansson is a child of my imagination. Though she grew there from the stories told to me by my friend Annalisa Platt, to whom this book is dedicated to. It was herself as a child in Copenhagen during the long years of German occupation. I had always been fascinated and moved by Annalisa's description of not only the personal deprivation that her family and her neighbors suffered during those years and the sacrifices they made, but even more by the greater picture she drew of me for the courage and integrity of the Danish people under the leadership of the king they loved so much, King Christian X. So I credit little Anne Marie and her family. I created them, and I set them down in Copenhagen apartment on a street where I had walked myself. I imagined their life against the real events of 1943. Denmark surrendered to Germany in 1940. It was true, and it is true that the reasons that Papa explained, Anne-Marie, the country was too small and undefended, with no army of any size. The people would have been destroyed had they tried to defend themselves against the huge German forces. So, surely, with great sorrow, King Christian X surrendered the overnight and the soldiers moved in. From then on, for 5 years, they occupied the country, visible on almost every street corner. Always armed and spit shine, they controlled the newspapers, the rail system, the government schools, the hospitals, and the day-to-day existence of Danish people. But they never controlled King Christian. It is true that he rode alone on a horse from the palace every morning, unguarded, and greeted his people. And though it seems charming to be a flight of author's fancy, the story about Papa that told Amory about the soldier and the Danish teenager, who was that man? The story recorded is in one of the documents that still remain from that time. It is also true, too, that on August 1943, the Danes sank their own entire navy in Copenhagen harbor as the Germans approached to take over the ships for their own use. My friend Annalisa remembers it, and many who were children at the time would have been awakened like little Christie by explosions and fiercely lighted the sky as the ships burned. On the new year of the Jewish high holidays in 1943, those who gathered to worship at the synagogue in Copenhagen, as the fictional Rosens did, were warned that that they were to be taken and relocated by the Germans. The rabbi knew because of a high German official told the Danish government, which passed the information along the leaders of the Jewish community. The name of that German was G.F. Duckwitz, and I hope that even today, so many years later, there are flowers on his grave because he was a man of compassion and courage. And so the Jews, all of the but a few who didn't believe the warning, fled the first raids. They fled into the arms of the Danes, who took them in, fed them, clothed them, hid them, and helped them along to safety to Sweden. In the weeks that followed the Jewish New Year, almost in the entire Jewish population of Denmark, nearly 7,000 people were smuggled across the sea to Sweden. This little hand-hemmed lined handkerchief Amory carried to her uncle, surely something made up by an author who wanted to create some heroine out of the fictional little girl. Nope. The handkerchief was a bold part of the history. After the Nazis began using police dogs to sniff out hidden passengers on the fishing boats, Swedish scientists worked swiftly to prevent such detection. So they created a powerful powder composed of dried rabbit's blood and cocaine. The blood attracted the dogs, and they would sniff it, and the cocaine numbed their nose and destroyed it temporarily for their sense of smell. Almost every boat captain used this permeated handkerchief, and many lives were saved by the device. The secret operations that saved the Jews were orchestrated by the Danish resistance, which, like all resistant movements, was composed mainly of very young and very brave. Peter Nielsen, though, as a fictional represents the courageous and idealistic young people, so many of who died in the hands of the enemy. In reading the resistance leaders in Denmark, I came across an account of a young man named Kim Mathiel Brun, who was eventually captured and executed by the Nazis. He was only 21 years old. I read his story, and I had read many others, turning the pages, skimming here and there. This sabotage, this tactic, this capture, that escape. After a while, even the courage becomes routine to the reader. Then, quite unprepared, I turned the page and faced a photograph of Kim Mathiel Brun. He wore a turtleneck, and his thick, light hair was windblown. His eyes looked out at me, unwavering, on the page. Seeing him there, so terribly young, broke my heart. But seeing the quiet determination in his boyish eyes made me determined, too, to tell his story, and that of the Danish people who shared his dreams. So I'd like to end this paragraph written by the man in the letter to his mother the night before he was put to death. And I want you to remember, I want you all to remember that you must not dream yourselves back to the times before the war, but dream yourself all, for all, young and old, must be to create an ideal human decency and not a narrow-minded and prejudiced one. This is a great gift our country hungers for, something every little peasant boy can look forward to, and with pleasure feel that he is a part of something that he can work and fight for. Surely that gift, the gift of the world of human decency, is the one that all countries hunger for still. I hope the story of Denmark and its people all remind you that such a world is possible.